You all for being here. I know we've absorbed a lot today, so thanks for being here for this last session. So as you said, I'm Emily Staugaitis. Our farm is Bandhu Gardens. We're in Detroit, just north of Hamtramck. And as a bit of introduction, there's a bunch of different folks who grow there. So I grow herbs and fruit. My friend and collaborator of 9 years, Manar Begum, grows Bangladeshi vegetables. So in the bucket, you can see beans and bitter melon and shishinda, zinga, which is loofah. This is actually an immature loofah, which gets eaten fresh. But you can see they've got trellises. And we work also with the Hamtramck High School Environmental Club. So in 2001, I applied for the grant. So we were a 2002 awardee. We were actually supposed to present last year, and the conference got snowed out. And last year it was supposed to be the students coming and presenting. So it's a bit of a bummer to have just me doing it. But they now, most of them have graduated and are living their robust young adult lives. It was the Youth Educator Grants and Community Food Systems Summer Apprenticeship was what it was called. I'll talk more about the grant at the end for anybody who's interested in the kind of grant specifics. But kind of one of our biggest takeaways was to be firm in the why and flexible in the how. So our objectives are listed out there. And how we wrote the grant, a lot can change in the 6 months to a year that it goes from application to actually doing the thing. So by the time we actually were getting ready to do things, KGD had stopped doing their Tuesday market. One of the farmers was unavailable. It was an unbelievably hot summer. The Northern Michigan Family Farms Conference had changed. Then this got snowed out. So we were kind of flying by the seat of our pants for some of it. But at the end of the day, we actually did really hit all of our objectives in different ways. Some of the favorite takeaways, and these were things that the students had put together last year, was mapping our food stories. One of the ways that we engaged with each other after visiting each of our farms was using kind of this visual aid system. And I put up one of the super crinkly, messy sheets there, but you can see we've been hanging on to these for a couple of years now. But after every farm that we visited, we would go through, and the first one we started with people, planet, and place, or profit, people, planet, and profit, and thinking about, with all of those being facets of sustainable agriculture, what did we see that farmer doing? So the first farmer we visited was B. Ayers, who is one of the founding members of the Michigan Flower Co-op, and they had a really fabulous flower farm. And after we were talking, the students then also added access, which I loved, that they kind of saw our framework and they were like, but we also need to talk about this. And so then each of the subsequent farms that we visited, we kind of mapped out, we used this kind of as our conceptual framework to be thinking about where all those things fell and where do we start to see patterns. All of the folks who ended up being our summer apprentices were Bangladeshi-American. Hamtramck has a really, really large Bangladeshi population. And I now actually I'm conversationally fluent in Bangla. So even though I can't provide kind of cultural, ethnic, or biological representation, being able to show up and provide linguistic representation was a really important facet in that. So mapping the food stories. Another big takeaway from the students was we were so lucky to grow up outside. The 5 girls that I worked with all actually had grown up in Bangladesh and then moved to the US as kids or young teens. And as we were outside, so you can see tiny in this picture here's all of them sitting on stumps. So these are 18-year-old girls just sitting on stumps under a tree. This was a collection of images that another student, Nafisa, had put together. They're not her photographs, but when she mapped out her family's food stories, these were pictures that she pulled of her experience and rememberings of childhood in Bangladesh. And she talked a lot about how she feels bad for her siblings that have grown up here and are just stuck inside. And so, this was another youth takeaway. You all weed too much. So Bangladeshi farmers, all of the students who were youth apprentices with us, their families all have gardens, but it tends to be their parents who are doing it. And the attitude is kind of like, we moved here so you don't have to do this. You should go to college. You should get a real job. But the takeaway from that is that then they don't have that connection, that there's the risk of that kind of intergenerational knowledge being lost. But there are these, so this is the KGD farm where we were there weeding, and then we were weeding my stuff, and they were like, you guys weed too much, because Bangladeshi farmers do all this trellising so that it mostly shades out the stuff underneath, or they lay down thick mulching or plastic, or just like really prep the site and then keep things continually with crop rotation. Like the soil is always covered. So you might take out 10 weeds a week, but you're not like, okay, I have to go weed the thing. And so all these times that we kept visiting other farmers, they were like, man, like you guys all weed too much. So I thought it was a very funny, reflection, because of the things that they see their parents doing. Weeding isn't one of them, because they've set up these other conditions. One of the things that we ended up doing was a lot of plant identification as kind of that precursor to weeding. Is like, well, you got to know who it is before you know if it stays or it goes. And they all, the girls all really got very interested in it. And there was one young woman in particular. 4 of the girls were seniors and we're all kind of pals, and then one girl was a freshman. And so she was a little bit outside of, not that it was cliquey, but she was a little bit outside of it. But she got really interested in the plant identification and doing illustrations. So she did these digital illustrations to become then signage for the farm. So there's Bee Balm or Monarda, and then she made these other ones. And it's like, is it what I would have drawn? Not necessarily, but it was so cool that she, of her own volition, would just go home and make these, and every day just send me another one, and then go back and forth. And it was like, she even got the, on the red clover, that there's this little lighter mark on the leaf, and just really, really keen attention to detail. So that was a really wonderful thing, and in which segued into doing herbal medicine making. So we ended up harvesting a lot of elderberries that summer. We ended up harvesting a lot of herbs that we dried, and you'll see they come back at the end. And then at the very end of the summer, we had, when they all went back to school, then they did kind of a teach-in with the rest of their environmental club. And so the students came, and then the girls who'd been the apprentices then led the kind of community medicine harvesting. So we dug marshmallow roots and red clover, raspberry leaf, some yarrow, 2 different mints, goldenrod, which then went to kind of restock the community herb shelf. And so so you have all these kids just teaching each other. It was really beautiful. So then another aspect of it was farms that we visited. So B. Ayers, who I mentioned, Shane Bernardo, who's Filipino, Keep Growing Detroit. We went to a couple of their volunteer nights. Nurturing Our Seeds, which is Aaron and Magnetic Sun. Buffalo Street Farm, which is Chris McGrain. And then Bandhu Gardens, which is me and Manara. So Nurturing Our Seeds, Aaron and Mag. Mag gave us a really great talk about why being your own farmer is the best farmer you can be. It's great to know a farmer, but it's even better to be a farmer. And the different ways that he relates to kind of the histories of being a black man and working with the land. And I think that was something that, within the Hamtramck is really diverse in some ways, but it's also really segregated in other ways. So like little kids all play with each other, but then there's this real cultural divide. And so to be able to have really intimate and meaningful conversations with people who don't look like you is not something that often happens. And so to be able to do it on a very small and intimate scale. Aaron was showing off the water catchment that they have that then has like a solar water purification, multiple chamber filter, so connecting back to, water's everywhere. So they were great visits. Shane talked a lot about family history and mental health. And so each of these farmers that we visited then kind of opened the door for other conversations just within our group. It was a really small cohort. Like sometimes people write grants to do much larger groups of students, but we were able to delve really deeply into things, and these, a couple of years later, these are still girls that will text me at 11 o'clock at night and ask, how's your baby, which is really sweet. So there's B, and the photo that was the bio photo was one that was taken by a student on the night that we were there. So we went through and she talked a lot about kind of the standards of quality that things have to have, which the girls really resonated with in terms of, produce that they harvest from their home gardens or that their parents harvest from their home gardens. It doesn't matter if it's cosmetically perfect, but if you're bringing it to the store, it does have to be. And so what happens within those gaps of loss of product, about costs? They really loved B's idea of being the lazy farmer and working with things like perennials or things that self-seed. Most of the crops that their parents grow are annuals. We are not Bangladesh, and so things that would thrive in a perennial sense in Bangladesh won't here in Michigan. So they're able to kind of push it with the annuals. But so the idea of perennials was something that was really new and exciting to them all. At Buffalo Street, Chris wasn't there, but we were able to go and harvest peaches, just armloads and armloads of peaches, which leads into, and then KGD, so we harvested garlic. So thinking about collective labor and the ways that all these sites kind of connect. And then getting farm-to-table pizza. So the night that we went, there was also a pop-up by a farm and pizza place that the farmer and my best bud, Erin, who's out in the hallway with my baby. Her partner made the pizza, but they used the produce from the farm. And so for the girls, they were like, wait, the pizza that we just ate had stuff from a farm that we visited. So it was really neat for them to be seeing those connections. In another aspect of the grant and the project was processing food and processing produce. So berries that they harvested, which we then turned into popsicles for our end of season party. So we had raspberry from our garden and then grape and peach from Chris's garden. These are awesome. They're these refillable popsicle tubes. Highly recommended. Connecting other things like science, so pollination, talking about male and female squash flowers, which ones do you harvest for making fried squash blossoms, so doing things like that. And the beautiful little bee in there. Peaches, a lot of the girls brought, a lot of these families are growing in just small family backyard lots, so it's like, a typical city lot is 30 feet by 100 feet, so then the backyard is maybe 40 by 30 feet. And so there's often not room for fruit trees. So fresh fruit, all these families in Bangladesh, we're so used to having, pineapples and mangoes and just like dripping. And so fresh fruit is really prized. And then, so the picture on the far side is amsoto, which amsoto is it's like a dried mango, but then one of their moms made it with the peaches that they brought home. So it was cool that it happened and all, we processed it into popsicles, but they processed it in this other way. And so, the ways in which the produce is the center of that Venn diagram. And we have all these different cultural relationships to it. So in terms of community connections, so we were spending every day at our space, Bandhu Gardens, but then a couple years late, and we visited Aaron's farm, and then a couple years later, some of the girls joined Detroit Food Academy, and they were like, Auntie, guess who came? Shane came and presented. Oh, guess who runs it? Aaron runs it. Oh, guess where this came from? And so the ways in which all these little experiences that didn't feel high stakes, none of it was particularly laborious. There were no quizzes afterwards. It was all there's kind of a rigor of pleasure to it, because why would you keep doing it if it's unpleasant, right? If we want to invite people into this kind of stewardship, you have to love it passionately. You have to want to do it more than you want to do anything else. And so, I just got goosebumps, sorry. And so for them talking about, because some of these students I had worked with, for years, I'd worked with Detroit, or with the Hamtramck High School Environmental Club, and it was sure, they like doing the farm work, but they really just like being there, to just be outside and not have any deliverables, not have anybody, cracking down on their time, not have to show anything for it. And there's so, especially for young people, being an educator, there's so little of that. And so to be able to have kind of this rigor of pleasure and rigor of enjoyment that we shared, and then for that, to be their baseline of then making these connections, somewhat organically. And it's like, yeah, I know, I was laying the breadcrumb trail for you. It was very intentional to connect these in this way. But so it's been a really, really neat thing to see. Or the way that Shane trades produce with Mako in exchange for meals at her weekly pop-up. So things like that the students were really excited about. So the culmination of it was this celebration. They made this collaborative poster where they each drew one little part of it and then cut it up and collaged it together and invited younger siblings, invited aunties, invited neighbors. And they were really in charge of it. Like I was like, whatever it is that you want to do, we can do. So they also set up an art station because they had enjoyed doing the plant identification so much. So they set that up for their littles. They had a tea tasting station. So all of the different herbs that we harvested, they laid out different teas. And we just had a great time. Within the grant, the kind of our deliverables that we had agreed to in the grant were, in the application, they ask you to say, what are you going to focus on, which sustainable concepts and practices, and there's a big long list. And so quality of life, permaculture, value-added and direct marketing, crop and landscape diversity, climate-resilient architecture, or agriculture, sorry. And so all of these things were things that we were already doing at our farm and things that their families were already doing, but they weren't identifying them as like, hey, that's a sustainable practice. And so to be able to step outside of it and then look back at their families and say, oh, right, quality of life. Yeah, my family's growing culturally relevant foods. That really increases our quality of life. Being outside every day, that totally impacts my mental health. Permaculture, yeah, we're already trellising. We're already composting in place. We're already selling foods to neighbors and friends. We're already intercropping. We're already doing rotation. We're already doing water catchment. We're already doing mulching. And so to be able to have that and, not to say that they didn't learn anything, but that they learned that it was like already all there in the beginning, which I think is like the most powerful thing. If you can just like help someone to unearth their existing power. So then coming back to these same slides, just in case we needed them at the end. Full disclosure, I'm also on the Youth Educator Grant Review Board. It's a really fantastic grant. If any of you work with young people, it's a really flexible team. They understand that $6,000 isn't a ton of money, and so if things need to shift and change, it's a really great team. But I know the bus is going to leave, but I want to save a little time for questions if anybody has any. Yeah.
So I'm interested in like recruitment of the cohort.
Yeah.
That's still happening.
So this was kind of like a one-off thing with the funding of the grant, but then I still serve in kind of a volunteer capacity as a community mentor with the group, which I have since 2017. And so when I knew we had gotten the grant, and the grant was completely modeled after a request that they had made. One of these other papers is a list that whenever we have events at the garden, I always put a big paper out that's like, what should we do next? And one year they had written down, like, we want summer jobs here. And I was like, okay, how many days a week? 3 days a week. Okay, how many hours a day? Like, okay, what do you need? We need transportation. So they had really set those parameters of what they wanted, and then I wrote the grant around it. But there's about 30 kids in the organization, and so I just made a really simple Google form that asked about interest, and then and sent it out to them, and then they replied, and kind of whoever, it ended up being, I think originally we were supposed to have 6, but 5 ended up being the group. So it was from an existing cohort of students that I already knew very, very well. So like after putting in, 6 years of unpaid work, to get paid a little bit for a summer felt really nice. Yeah. Any other questions? Does anybody already work with young people? Yeah.
What's the next step look like? It feels as if you're really connected with the Hamtramck youth. and especially through the Sustainability Club.
Yeah.
Are there any other things that you plan on doing? It's so fun.
Yeah, it's been really fun actually. So also becoming a parent has really changed my capacity, and I now actually also teach on Thursdays, which is the day that they meet. And so like remembering that I don't always have to be the one like cranking the handle, right? I can invite other people in to do things. And I mean their club runs kind of independently anyhow. But for the students, they enjoyed this so much and they reflected so much on how great it was being outside as a kid that they started a middle school club, a middle school environmental club. So now those middle school kids are gonna come, and so the big kids run it for the little kids, which is so cute. And they're also now partnered up with an artist named Simon Anton who does work with plastic, recycled plastic and stuff. And so the students who were partly responsible for Hamtramck having any recycling at all are now like collecting plastic, and then it gets shredded down, and they've been making things and kind of using that as a fun like advocacy and awareness thing.
And your farm is like the base for them to come?
Kind of home base, yeah. And there's a dye collective, so now we're also, and so the high school kids are also now working with the artist folks who are growing dye plants, so indigo and cosmos and hollyhock and all kinds of stuff. So it's kind of just like it changes every season, which is beautiful, and it grows, and it's, this is the 9th year of growing on that property, and it, just really takes time to build those relationships and to set it up so that there is just this easy flow. For a while you have to be like, please come do this thing, and then nobody shows up, and then you do it again next year, and then people are like, wait, I guess she's serious about this, maybe we should show up, and then they do. And so now it's really beautiful to like not have to be to not even have to be there all the time, and that like other people are really having ownership over that space. Sometimes I come by and the girls are having like a pizza picnic under the picnic shelter, and she's like, you guys are so sweet. So it's been a really cool thing. So they've asked for more summer jobs. We could reapply for this, but also thinking about like how to make it a thing that potentially is more sustainable. Like, is there an interest in like selling produce to run it, or how do we figure that out? But yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm curious, do you know, does Grow Detroit Young Talent Fund work in Hamtramck or Highland Park?
So it's tricky. Because we are technically an LLC and not a nonprofit, we would have to pay. If we were a nonprofit, then keep the...
You should partner.
So we could partner. Know any nonprofits?
No.
But yeah, so that's one of the thoughts. But because a lot of the students do live in Hamtramck, then they're not eligible for it. We've thought about working with GM because there's a big strategic partnership with them, and we've been interested in doing some solar panel projects, which is one of the other things on the big lists. And so students could be doing that. But that's one of those ebbs and flows, Yeah. But yeah, if you work with youth, or you're considering working with youth, or other people who do, I highly recommend this grant. It's they're very realistic. Like some funding bodies want you to like promise the moon, and they're really like, are you sure you're paying yourself enough? Like, what? It's like you never get that, and they're really flexible with like if the budget needs to change. It's real people, and the grant review process I think is a really equitable process. They've tried to keep the application really streamlined, so I highly recommend it. I think this talk is going to be online, maybe. But so there's my email address, so please feel free to get in touch if you're interested, or if you're in Detroit, come eat raspberries with us. So, yeah. Cool. Thank you.